Hello, this is Sanaa Green. I am a healer and informal educator and communicator. And today we are interviewing Elliott McCants. And this is for the Gathering Wisdom Amidst COVID-19. This is a series that I thought of when I started to question why are we in the midst of what we later came to know as a pandemic? What are some of the topics and issues that we can grow from and learn from this experience? And so I've sought out wise people in the community, primarily in and around Detroit, Michigan, to get more information, to get different perspectives on what we can, how we can interpret this experience. And today we're going to be talking about a topic that is really sensitive for many people because it's so scary. And that is the topic of death. What is death? How can we prepare for it? How can we move through it? And how can we take a look at other belief systems and how other belief systems look at death so that we can maybe have a little comfort for ourselves as we move through this time where maybe we've known someone who passed away, someone in our family passed away, or you're just considering your own mortality. I think this show will be really helpful for you. So before I go on, I'd like to introduce Elliott McCants. And can you please give us a little bit of information about yourself? And then I want to hear how you can speak about death with some authority based on your knowledge and experience.
Well, as you said, my name's Elliott McCants. I'm an educator. I've been in education for over 25 years. Have been in and around the African cultural community and the conscious community for probably about 40 years or so. And having experience in traditional um, religions, they look at traditional cultures, they look at the transition of what we call death as something a little different. Having the unfortunate personal experience is kind of what makes one a bit of an expert, but we don't want to wear that badge like that.
Yes, yes, because actually, having ushered my parents, my mother and father, into through the process of dying from the body that they have now and into another form of existence. That's what I believe. I feel like I have a unique experience that, and a unique perspective that kind of shifts my idea of what death is. But before we get into that, I wanted to ask you if you could share some of your own experiences. One of the things you mentioned to me was that you had a student who, in the midst of this craziness, ended up losing his life. Could you give us a little information about that?
Yeah, and that was one of the more difficult situations for me. We had just seen each other like in March, early April, and it was the instance where he asked someone to wear a mask because of the policy of the store, and they got angry and upset, and he was later attacked. Now, there are multiple stories. I'm not clear about how things transpired in order for him to lose his life, but the fact that he lost his life by simply doing his job was very difficult because we had just texted each other like 2 days before that. He was going to come, hey, big bro, I'm coming over to bring you some stuff on your birthday. And then 2 days before that, he was no longer here. The most difficult thing is he was one of those gentlemen that you he'll talk to everybody. So if he was disrespectful, and he might have been in this, oh, I was in my feelings for a moment, let me apologize, and then you move on from there. But it was very very rarely would he be like that. Would he be that angry person? Because he was big. He was a big fella. You know, one of the as his teacher, one of the first things in class when we met was, you know, I teased him because he was he's a big, just a big fella. And foolishly I would mess with him and talk trash to him or whatever. And so on break, he was like, you know, hey, teach, let me talk to you. And I came out, you know, not thinking anything about me being facetious earlier, being silly earlier. And he gives me this huge, massive hug, right? But that was the beginning of our brotherhood. He became more than a student to me. And this is like most of my students, they become more than just that, than just a student. He became my big little brother. And he introduced me to his family, and you know, I knew of his children, even though I never met them personally. I knew of his children, and whenever they needed any help, if he or his wife couldn't help, they call me. Yeah, but I found out that his wife was a better math teacher than I am. You know, so but she's not a teacher. Said that I don't like to teach, but she like really, and she was in support of me helping him and helping the children when, you know, so we became kind of close knit. Now after his graduation, of course, we kind of went our separate ways. I was no longer where I was working at, and he had moved on to a couple of different jobs, and then we just happened to reconnect. We just happened to reconnect um, again when I went to the store where he worked at, and from there, he we talked off and on, back and forth. He was looking to move out of the job he was at to move to another job, and I told him if I saw anything, I'd help him out. We'd run across each other, big bro, little bro, stuff like that. I mean, because that's how I really like to treat people, like we're family. And talked a couple more times. He texted me right before my birthday. You know, big bro, if you need anything, let me know. And then next thing I know, I hear about this tragedy. The beautiful thing that came out of it was the outpouring of love for his family that people don't think that people have for each other, because he was that type of guy that where you wanted to, you know, you would do anything for him if you could. He
Yeah,
was that type of guy. So his, you know, people loved him. You know, not that he didn't have his bad human moments. He had them. Everybody does.
right.
But for the most part, if he did, you know, because even in our first meeting, it could have went horribly wrong for me, but it didn't, because he understood where I was coming from. And he told me, I need that tough love from you in order to get this accomplished.
Yes. Well, and you're in Flint, Michigan. So I'm in Detroit, you're in Flint. And I
Yeah,
think people have not heard much about Flint except for the Flint water crisis, and may even perceive that it's not as, as a nurturing community as you mentioned.
right.
That there's outpouring of love, and you know, and I think one of the things that I have noticed about Detroit when I left Detroit and then came back is that this is a very family oriented place, and people remember you from years back and
Mhm.
remember you fondly.
Yeah,
And and I think Flint may be similar to that. Would you agree?
absolutely, very much so. I still run across people that work with my dad who would be in their late 70s or 80s, you know, and almost 90, and still it's, you know, boy, we making sure you take care of your family because I remember your dad. And it's funny for them to call me, they'll say that, but boy, at my age, like I'm still a youngster, but I understand their position. I understand where they're coming from, and it's in term of endearment more than it is being derogatory or negative. So I
Yes.
understand where they come from, because they're like, you know, I call them uncle or pop or mom or auntie or whatever, and so it's endearing.
Hmm. Hmm. Yes. Yes. And I think as a teacher, I'm an, like I said, an informal educator. I'm not in the schools all the time. But you are, and you work with a lot of different students. And I think I think teachers probably have a unique um, experience of when a student passes away, when any student, any of their students passes away. Do you
Yeah,
think?
absolutely. Because when you give the type of time and energy to people and you want them, despite the odds, to be the best that they can be, because a lot of times the odds are stacked against people because of the nature of the beasts, and you want them so, and you put so much time in, you want them so much to achieve their goals and dreams, and you do anything probably sometimes above and beyond and outside the classroom. One of the things I used to do is I used to give my phone number out. So if whether they used it or not, I would still hear from some, or I would hear even if they didn't complete one program, they completed another program, as long as they got their education, and that was important. So teachers pour out a lot more than what people think, other than paper and pencils. Um, we give and we give, and when we don't see some of our students or we hear some things have happened, even if we know that it's the nature of life to sometimes not reach the late 80s or 90s, and people make choices that there are consequences for, we still always hope and dream for each and every one that they're successful in whatever they choose to do. And you keep that. If you find out that some of them didn't make it and they may be incarcerated, you just hope that whatever they're doing, they're still doing the best of whatever they're doing wherever they are. And if they are on vacation, that they come off vacation and then go ahead on and proceed with their dreams and goals, and don't let a detour and a long extended stay vacation um, be a reason for them not to finish.
And so we should point out that the young man that you mentioned who passed away was an adult student. You were teaching him adult education. He was looking to get his GED. Is that
Yes,
right?
ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
So, so the fact that he made a transition in his life and went back to school to better himself makes it even, I think it makes it even more tragic that the effort that he put in to better himself is not, well, I guess I think the effort in and of itself was useful, but it's unfortunate that he's not going to be able to take greater advantage
Right.
of
Right.
it.
Yes. Yes.
Mhm. So I wanted to also ask you about African traditions. You said you've been involved in the African, what did you call it? The conscious community.
Yes.
I believe you know something about African spirituality. Do you have anything you could share about African spirituality and how it views death?
Well, most all traditional African cultures see death as nothing more than a transition. That there is not this, even if the leaving of the physical body is one thing, that you just transform and transition into a spirit, which is what is part of us anyway. So the physical death is nothing more than just being released from a physical body, but you're still there, and we can still communicate with the spirits of those who are no longer here. So for many people that are elders in the traditional cultures, to leave here and be joined with the ancestors that have left before them is really kind of joyous, because their understanding is that though I may leave one plane, I'm going to go back to the heavenly plane with my parents and my grandparents and my brothers and sisters, whoever have passed on before me, so we can still be a family. And then they also know that they can affect change with the people who are still here on a physical plane here on this planet, on this side.
Meaning the people who have passed over, our ancestors, can be helpful to us while we're still living.
Yes, yes. And they can influence certain things for the betterment of the next generation that comes after.
Yes. Have you experienced that at all? Have you experienced your ancestors being present or helping you in a different in any situation?
All the time, all the time, all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes if I'm building a project, I like to work with my hands, and I'll really learn that from my dad. I'll hear, don't do it that way, do it this way. And I'll kind of just smile and I'll say, okay, well, I hear you. And I'll do it that way, and it'll be exactly the way it's supposed to be.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and there was a time when my father was part of the Afrocentric community in Detroit, and he was part of the Council of Elders,
Mm,
and he believed that he was well respected. He was a community activist. He was very active in his union before he became a community activist, and he was very well respected. And so sometimes there have been people who will receive me warmly just because they know him
hmm
and know his name. And so I feel like that's really him going before me to make the way clear.
Right. Absolutely.
Which I really appreciate, really appreciate. Or I'll hear a song that my mother used to sing, and it'll remind me of her. So I really do believe that our ancestors are still here. And the thing that I really cherish is realizing that the love that my parents have for me, my brother is also an ancestor, and the love that they have for me is still present. Like when someone dies, the love that you have between you doesn't dissipate. It's always still there. It's always still there, and in fact, it can transition and transform because your ancestors can release some of the um, personality that they had that may have clouded their love. It can become even purer when they move into the spirit world.
Right. Absolutely.
Are you finding that more people are interested in African spirituality than, say, 30 years ago?
I think that there's an awakening that's allowing people to see something different than they were years ago. Back in the 50s and the 60s, I think we had a really serious cultural conscious revolution. There was much, much more brotherhood and sisterhood because it was very clear what was going on outside of our communities and how it was affecting our communities internally. The revolution and the belief systems and the way people are now seeing uh, traditional African religions now is important because it was kind of dropped off on the wayside before, and people are picking it up again because they're seeing that the connection to our enslavement and how those beliefs kind of kept us locked in and not free. But they're also understanding where even Christianity and Islam came
Wait,
from.
so let me just clarify. So you're saying enslavement, and what beliefs are you talking about? Not which beliefs kept people in an enslaved mentality? Not the African,
No,
not
no, 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 no. But you can also see that even inside the Christianity and Islam and any other belief systems that were broached on people that were just kind of put on people to accept and believe in, you see African cultural spirituality inside of it anyway, because it's just part of our DNA. It's part of our nature to do something that's a little bit different. So you may have um, one form of worship that's very stoic, but when it came to people that are of African descent and Africans in America, it gets changed up, and you add some music, and you got the dance, and you got the where people, um, I don't want to say get possessed, but basically that's really what it is when they get the Holy Ghost, and that's all it is. And it's even interesting that I've been able to.
but let's talk about possessed, because when we generally think about possessed, people feel as if it's like some evil demon spirit comes and makes you do something devious, something kill, or we're not actually talking about that.
No, because and that's a European construct. Now, the whole point of the European ideology behind that and the propaganda behind that was to move away from these traditional religions and move towards something else. But Spirit says and shows something different. So when a person is in church and they get the Holy Ghost and they start to dance, they really get it. And they get the Holy Ghost and they start to dance. Well, you can really see some traditional religious dances inside of it if you know what to look for. But
Mhm.
the idea of this possession and the demonic stuff comes from Hollywood and propaganda.
And fear of and not understanding.
Oh, definitely fear, because we've been told to fear ourselves and to fear our ways of life and to fear everything other than what we're supposed to fear.
Yes, and it's just like really when you look at the history of Christianity and how the Christian church gradually moved away from some of the more spiritual indigenous traditions of even Europeans and took away a lot of, and even in the Bible, it talks about the spirit and it talks about speaking in tongues, and it also speaks about prophecy and being able to have dreams and be that are prophetic and which is psychic ability. That was looked upon unfavorably in part because there were some women who were really engaged in it, and the church wanted to be able to have more control
Absolutely. Right.
over people and over what people believed, and they wanted to try to do away with some of the indigenous religions, not only in Africa, in South America, Central America, but also in Europe. And so they took away. They actually had this Nicene conference and and tried to strip all the spiritual things that couldn't be proven with science. They tried to strip it all away. And
Right.
so then, and so now, but for for people who were of African descent, we could never really be stripped of it.
No, no, because it's the ancestral spiritual DNA is in us. So it's going to come out in one way, shape, or form. So when people get the Holy Ghost, that's nothing more than the Spirit coming to speak through a different form. And it's always based on the drum. I've never seen a singer bring the Holy Ghost. I've never seen the guitar player make somebody get the Holy Ghost. I've never seen it. It might have happened, but I've never seen it.
I
But it's
think
always been a
you're biased
drummer.
as a drummer. Do you think you're maybe biased as a drummer? But I think you're true. It's the rhythm, and then the organ will do the rhythm.
But
It,
it's always been, from what I've seen, the drummer.
right.
It might be a tiny bias, but
Just a tiny bias.
just a little bit.
So tell me about African drumming and your experience with it. How have you seen it be a part of experiences? I think you mentioned before that you knew someone who passed away and you actually drummed at the going home service. Can you tell us a little bit about the drum and how it can be utilized in life as a comfort, as because most of us know it as a thing to dance with.
Right. Well,
Mhm.
because the drum has always been part of life in Africa. And so even like I said earlier, even in a transition from one form to another, that's still part of life. It's the cycle of life. So for myself and my son to be involved in a ceremony for a young man who's about to be one, it was
You're
really,
old.
yes, he was about to be one. It was very special to be able to play for the unique way in which his parents released him. And we were asked to play, and we played for his homegoing at the river. It wasn't a traditional funeral. We were asked to wear white and to drum. And as they floated his um, gifts down the river, we drummed until we could no longer see him. So it was really nice. It was special.
Mhm.
But it's also just part of life. It's always been that part of the cycle of life. You know, it's a transition. So when I was asked to speak afterwards, and that's exactly what I said. I mean, it's just, he's not in that physical form anymore. He's much more powerful, and he'll be back because he will be.
Yes. And he was just 1 year old. That's really. That had to have been very tragic, very
That,
difficult for everyone.
yeah, it was very tough for his parents because, of course, there was no suspecting reason why he left here. And then for me, he was just over here a little while ago and crawling up, and I'm putting him on the floor, and they're fussing because they don't want him to be on the floor because he's gonna learn how to walk. And he don't live here, so it don't matter if he tear up your house. Uh, and so yeah, I put him on the floor, and he'd stand there and hold on and wiggle around until he kind of was able to stable himself. And then next thing I heard, he'd be in his packing place, his little crib, and he'd flip it over so he could get out, so he could figure out how to walk. And then of course I heard about the tragedy later. But
Mhm.
he's still a beautiful little man. And
Yeah.
but to be able to play the drum for him as he was released was perfect, and it was powerful.
Now, does African tradition have any um, belief systems that relate to a baby passing away, a young person passing away?
Yes. And certain in the Yoruba, a child that passes before his parent is called his or her parent, or as he or she is called abiku. And that means the spirit that's come to give joy and then to leave and to bring sorrow.
Wow, how can that be that a life can come to bring joy and sorrow? Because we just imagine that a baby, when a baby is born, that a baby is really just here for joy. And although I was reading in Khalil Gibran, he had a story about joy and sorrow and how the two are really this one coin,
Right.
different sides of the same coin. Is that how African tradition looks at it?
Yes. Because especially if something happens and a child leaves early, like in this situation, this instance, and there's no reason, then it's the I guess the blanketed, but the idea is that that's a different type of spirit that came to give joy and then give sorrow. So they're not here to last. To that spirit is not here for a long period of time.
Yes, yes, yes. I feel that way about my brother. I don't think he came to live a long time. He was 23 when he
Yeah.
passed away, and he had sickle cell thalassemia. So it was almost like he wasn't really planning on staying a long
Right.
time.
Mm.
Like, not that you could say that. My mother used to say that she didn't think he was planning to stay a long time.
Mm.
Yes. So I really appreciate the information you've given us about African tradition, and I wanted to ask you about yet another death that you have um, been a part of in this, what, 3 month period, 2 month window?
About 2 months. Yep.
Yes, and that
Yeah.
was your, I think it was one of your neighbors, an
Oh
elderly
yes.
passed away.
Uh, he was like, yeah, he was the neighbor. He was one of my neighbors. He would have been 95 this last week, and I was just honored that the family asked me to be there as part of the family to help out in whatever way that we could. Part of was just making sure that we got him from one bed to the other, and just checking in and making sure if his daughter needed anything, who was his primary caretaker, and provide whatever support we could. And it was an honor because he was a Marine in World War II, and it was an honor to be there as he transitioned from one form to the other form, and it was an honor to be able to walk him to his final destination.
Welcome to its final destination. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Now, is that a belief system? Is that historical? Because I remember us talking about Egypt. And one of the things I think a lot of us know about is that in Egypt, there was a particular preparation for death. And when we see the pharaohs, we see that there was a lot of thought that went into preparing their tomb,
Right.
to mummifying their bodies, to things that were in the tomb or in the casket. And it seemed like there was a whole cast, a whole group of people in Egypt whose job it was to, I mean, I guess there were a variety of jobs. Do you know anything about that?
Or just a little bit. The pyramid text is really a set of words of power who that allows the when they're spoken to the ushering of the spirit through the 12 hours of night. So of course you've got 12 hours of daytime and 12 hours of nighttime, and those words of power are used in order to usher the spirit to the other side, to go to the to a mentor, to be on the solar boat. But there are other medicines or other natural formulas used, which is the reason why we see the mummified remains of the pharaohs and kings and queens and the other important people last for several thousand years, because they use a different way of keeping them around. So when those words of power and those other medicines are spoken and used, of course, then we still see the remains to this day, and they look almost fairly human, like they did when they were alive. Now, I think the science has been lost, but we definitely don't have those same words of power. Um, and we definitely don't use those interpretations in order to usher the spirit of that person on to the next part of their life, which is the other 12 hours.
Mm. Was it difficult to be present when your neighbor passed away?
No, because at 94 and 11 months and fighting in the war and fighting different injustices and hearing the stories, it was just honored. It was an honor to be there. Now, the child, that was a different manner, because this is a fresh life, which we consider to be fresh. You're just starting out. And it was really much more difficult for that than it was for 95 and 11 months, 94 and 11 months than it was for 11 months.
Mhm. But some people are afraid to be around someone who is dying. How can you not be how can you be okay with it? What has prepared you to be able to have the kind of countenance that allows you to be around people who are passing away?
Well, unfortunately, having a lot of experience kind of prepares you. And then you just have to see it as an honor, as kind of as a traditionalist. I saw a phrase one time that says, live because nobody gets out of life alive. So I'm not sure whether it's a bit of just who I am, but in being able to be there for the family of the the baby that passed, and then being able to be there for the elder that passed, it was just very honorable. And I was very honored by them asking me to be part of their lives.
Yes. One final question before we close. What would you say to someone who knows that someone they love is near death? How is there anything that you would say to them to help them prepare for the process?
I think the greatest wisdom I can impart, especially if they're a caretaker, if you're a caretaker, that's the most difficult job, because you sacrifice a lot. You sacrifice being able to come and go. You're there 24 hours, 7 days a week, or whatever. Even if you have somebody that comes in and sits while you work, which was a case that happened with me. But you're there, and you're the one that's being relied on to be the caretaker, and that means that that person, they're more special than they realize. Because a lot of people just, well, I've got, I'm mad because I've got to sit here and I got to take care of this person. And no, it's honor. It's an honor. God, the Spirit gave you this opportunity to prepare that person for their next phase of life. And I think people get it because we stay selfish. Or if you're selfish, well, I want to go to the club and I want to go do this and I want to go do that. Oh, I got to stay here and take care of this person. And then the response is going to be that I'm angry instead of saying I'm honored. And people should understand that when they're chosen to be the person to take care of someone who's transitioning, whether it be in a hospice, whether it be at home, whether it be in the hospital, whether it be in the hospital, that's an honor.
Yes.
That's an honor. I mean, I would have my father, I would have wanted him to be home, but of course he chose not to. But it was an honor to even be there.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your experiences. I know that they can be difficult. Just it's almost like reliving when people have passed away. And I think that if people have more opportunity to talk about or to hear others' experiences with death, that it can be very, very helpful and maybe even healing. So what you've done has I think will I think make it easier for a lot of people. So thank you
Well,
so much.
you're so welcome. Thank you very much.
And
And anything we can do to help, we should, what that's what we're here for. We're here to help.
okay. All right. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome.